Hello and welcome. In this video, we are going to look at an emotion that runs many people's whole lives. We are talking about the emotion of fear, and it's an emotion that, if we allow it to control us, always leads to an inability to live life fully. It completely outlives its usefulness as soon as it's not a signal that something in the present moment is wrong, just as long as one has a bit of common sense in place. To be more precise, fear governs much of human behavior, influencing decisions, relationships, and perceptions of the world. Dr. David R. Hawkins provides a radical approach to transcending fear, not by suppressing or resisting it, but by fully experiencing and releasing it through surrender. He presents fear not as a necessary survival tool, but as an internal limitation that distorts reality, constrains potential, and prevents access to inner peace. His method challenges the ways we usually approach fear with suppression, reactivity, or avoidance, suggesting instead that it is an illusion that dissolves when one stops clinging to it. To understand this more fully, it's important to recognize that fear can be felt very directly as a physical sensation. This is not something that all people are aware of. Most are only vaguely aware of a sense of discomfort, which leads to automatic thoughts about the emotion, which they usually respond to by either reacting to it or suppressing it. Reactions take the form of verbal or physical behavior, while suppression leads to the emotional energy getting stored in the body, where it becomes a blockage that prevents energy from flowing freely through the body until something triggers the energy again. If someone, on the other hand, consistently acts on negative emotions, they will create neurological patterns that prime them to respond to the same types of situations in the same manner in the future. So both of these very common coping strategies serve to keep us trapped. Once you've become more acquainted with the energies in the body, you will be able to allow the energy to be felt and released on its own, without any internal or external triggers. If fear, on the other hand, is triggered spontaneously without you becoming aware of what is happening, you will notice that your mind immediately starts thinking about it, trying to figure out what is wrong. It's important to realize that fear arises from the mind's interpretations rather than from actual external threats, more or less independently of whether there is a threat or the severity if there is one. The mind anticipates possible dangers, playing out imagined scenarios of loss, failure, or rejection. It does not distinguish between what is happening in the present, what might happen in the future, or vivid memories from past traumatic events. On top of that, our minds have evolved to survive in life-threatening situations, and the part of the brain called the amygdala, which is the part of the brain where you find the fight-flight-freeze response, cannot distinguish between a lethal predator or an angry boss or spouse. What this means is that unless we learn how to allow emotions to pass through us, we will suppress them, since acting on them is not acceptable in modern society, and neither would we want it to be. This creates a loop where fear feeds on itself, growing stronger the more attention it is given, whether through thoughts, words, actions, or attempts at suppressing it. Hawkins explains that most fear is unnecessary and self-created, sustained by mental projections rather than real events. People spend much of their lives reacting to imagined threats, living in a state of contraction and self-protection rather than openness and flow. This defensive posture limits possibilities, distorts perceptions, and keeps life confined within narrow boundaries. Letting go of fear requires a shift in perception. People attempt to push fear away by suppressing it, numbing it with external comforts, or overanalyzing it in an effort to rationalize their way out of it. These strategies fail because they keep attention locked onto the fear itself. A common saying is, "Whatever is resisted persists." This is certainly true when it comes to fear. When fear, on the other hand, is allowed to be fully felt without avoidance or resistance, its hold begins to weaken. Dr. Hawkins's letting go technique provides a structured way to release fear. It begins with awareness. It bears repeating that many people are unaware of how much fear they carry, as it becomes a background presence, influencing every aspect of life. Fear manifests physically as tension, and the emotion can be felt in a real, tangible sense. Finally, it manifests mentally as obsessive thinking. The first step is to recognize its presence without immediately trying to change it. The next step is allowing it to be felt fully. This means experiencing fear without suppressing, explaining, or reacting to it. The mind often jumps in with thoughts to justify or analyze the emotion, but true release happens when fear is observed as a raw sensation rather than a concept. Physical sensations are often the most direct way to notice fear. Tightness in the chest, unease in the stomach, or a racing heart are all common bodily expressions of fear. Instead of resisting these sensations, one observes them with detachment, allowing them to pass on their own. The key is non-resistance. The more fully an emotion is experienced without avoidance, the more it begins to dissipate. It is resistance that keeps fear alive. Once resistance drops, fear has nothing to hold on to. The process of surrender does not involve trying to get rid of fear, but simply allowing it to be present without engaging with it. When this is done consistently, fear naturally subsides, often more quickly than expected. It's important to learn to observe yourself to truly understand this. Apart from our tendency to suppress and engage in useless thought activity, we also have a tendency to start struggling with the emotion, trying to force it to go away. This is usually the next obstacle once one has started to become a bit acquainted with the emotion and learned how to let go of resistance. The big thing is to truly learn to do nothing when the emotion arises, which is much harder than it sounds, as we have, for such a long time, trained ourselves into constant activity of one type or another. And yes, watching TV series is also a form of activity. One of the reasons fear persists is that people believe it serves a necessary function. The mind tells a story that fear is needed for survival, that without it, one would be reckless, vulnerable, or unprepared for dangers. This assumption is false, except when someone truly lacks common sense or is in a genuinely risky situation. It is worth mentioning that, for someone who is in tune with their intuition, fear can signal that a danger not immediately apparent is present, or that someone's intentions are different from what they are saying. But for this to work accurately, one needs to be free from fears related to similar past experiences. Otherwise, the fear will distort the intuition. In other words, letting go of fear does not mean becoming careless or indifferent. It means no longer being paralyzed by imagined catastrophes. When fear is released, clarity emerges. Decisions are made more effectively, not from panic, but from a place of calm awareness. Fear distorts perception, making situations appear more threatening than they are. Without fear, situations are seen as they are, without exaggeration or unnecessary concern. Attachment plays a crucial role in sustaining fear. People fear loss because they are attached to possessions, relationships, or identities. They fear failure because they are attached to a specific image of success. They fear uncertainty because they are attached to control. The more one clings to something, the greater the fear of losing it. Dr. Hawkins emphasizes that true freedom comes from letting go of attachment itself. This does not mean abandoning everything, but recognizing that real security does not come from external conditions. The more one depends on external circumstances for safety, the more fragile that safety becomes. When inner stability is found, external conditions lose their power to dictate emotional states. In this context, it's worth mentioning one of the most crippling fears, the fear of other people's opinions. In general, concern for what other people think hinders authenticity, both in choices and in our sense of who we are. Instead of living the lives we truly want, we become prisoners to the need to uphold a false self-image, and try to be who others will like, praise, or just plainly find normal. This leads to a life of inauthenticity, where one's decisions are based not on personal truth, but on fear of judgment. Fear is often rooted in unconscious belief systems. Many fears are inherited from societal conditioning, past experiences, or authority figures. A child who grows up in an environment of anxiety absorbs fear as a default response to life. Over time, fear-based programming becomes so ingrained that it feels natural. Breaking free from fear requires questioning these assumptions. Is fear truly necessary? What would life be like without it? Those who have transcended fear describe life as more peaceful, joyful, and expansive without it. They do not become passive or disconnected, but instead find themselves more present and engaged in life. Dr. Hawkins presents a model of consciousness that categorizes human emotions in a structured hierarchy. On this scale, fear calibrates at a low level of consciousness, characterized by anxiety, avoidance, and self-protection. Living in fear keeps awareness locked in a restricted state, where possibilities seem limited and threats appear everywhere. As consciousness expands, fear diminishes, replaced by neutrality, acceptance, and eventually love. Love and fear cannot coexist. The higher the level of consciousness, the less fear is present. This is why letting go of fear is not merely a psychological exercise, but a shift in consciousness itself. The process of letting go must be repeated. Some fears are deeply ingrained and resurface multiple times. Each time, the same principle applies. Allow the fear to be felt, observe it without resistance, and let it pass. With practice, fear loses its ability to dominate. It may still arise, but it no longer controls actions or decisions. Instead of being driven by fear, one moves through life with greater ease and flexibility. The energy that was previously locked in fear is freed up, leading to greater creativity, spontaneity, and enjoyment of life. Fear is an illusion sustained by resistance. When resistance is dropped, fear dissolves. Life becomes lighter, clearer, and more fluid. The mind no longer searches for threats in every situation. The nervous system relaxes and emotions stabilize. The shift from fear to peace does not happen through force or effort, but through surrender. The more one lets go, the freer life becomes. There is no need to fight fear. There is only the choice to stop holding on to it. In summary, Dr. David R. Hawkins explains that fear is an illusion sustained by resistance and attachment. It arises from imagined threats rather than real dangers, limiting perception and distorting reality. The more one resists fear, the stronger it becomes. His letting go technique involves fully experiencing fear without suppression or reaction, allowing it to dissolve naturally. Fear is rooted in attachment to control, security, or outcomes. True freedom comes from recognizing that real stability is found within, not in external circumstances. Hawkins places fear at a low level of consciousness, where it restricts clarity and action. As fear is released, ease and presence replace anxiety. Letting go is a continuous process, but over time, fear loses its grip, and life unfolds with greater peace and freedom. A crucial aspect of letting go of fear is to detach from it. We habitually make something more than a sensation out of fear, unconsciously reacting to it as if it is related to something real in our immediate circumstances. Again, we need to cultivate the habit of being okay with feeling the fear without reacting to it or suppressing it. Just allow it to be there from a place of observing detachment, and it will release on its own. Remember clearly, all you need to do to let go of fear is to refrain from engaging with it in any way. But also know that it's very often not obvious that this is what you're doing, and that you need to observe yourself quite a bit to spot this impulse in action. Finally, fear is a matter of perspective. If you are drawn to this type of material, chances are that you are starting to wake up to the fact that there is much more to life than what we can perceive with our five senses, and that life will not end with death. Knowing that even the absolute end of this existence is not the end of our total existence ought to bring some calm into our day-to-day lives if we can keep it in the back of our minds. You could argue that there are worse fates than death, but these are extreme cases for most of us. And when we know that we're ultimately safe, even if the worst happens, it takes the edge off the severity of whatever situations we find ourselves in. If you liked this video, we have other videos on Hawkins, as well as one that deals with fear from the perspective of Vadim Zeland's reality transurfing. You can see links to those and a playlist with Hawkins at the end screen right now. We recommend the video about surrender based on Hawkins' works for a deeper understanding of the letting go process.
You've now reached the end of the video. Remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for your time.